Celestine Payne. In 1991, Celestine Payne poisoned her husband in Passaic County, New Jersey. She then had his body placed in a cardboard box and left on the side of a road. Her autistic tenant, Eugene Cooper, and her children, who were between the ages of 14 and 20, helped her conceal the crime, but investigators later determined that Payne carried out the murder in order to collect a $39,000 life insurance payout. 2 years later, in 1993, Payne took out a life insurance policy on Eugene Cooper and named herself as the beneficiary. She told her daughter's boyfriend that Cooper had molested her daughter and persuaded him to attack Cooper. Cooper was stabbed but survived long enough to be hospitalized, and while he was in the hospital, Payne presented herself as his mother and signed a do not resuscitate order. This ensured that Cooper died without further medical intervention. In 1995, Payne escalated her crimes by creating a false identity named Tara Carter. She encouraged her daughter to impersonate this fictional 18-year-old so that Payne could obtain another life insurance policy with herself as the beneficiary. That year, her daughter's boyfriend carried out another killing. The victim's body, claimed to be Tara Carter, was discovered in Eastside Park in Paterson. Investigators later confirmed that no such person existed and that the identity had been fabricated as part of Payne's insurance scheme. In 1997, Payne pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and other related charges. She was sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms in prison. Melanie McGuire. In April 2004, William McGuire, a 39-year-old computer programmer from Woodbridge, New Jersey, suddenly vanished after an argument with his wife, Melanie McGuire, a respected fertility nurse. Just days later, fishermen discovered a suitcase floating in the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. Inside the suitcase were human remains. Over the following weeks, 2 more suitcases surfaced in the same waters, each containing additional dismembered body parts that DNA testing confirmed that the victim was William McGuire. Investigators quickly began piecing the case together. Records revealed that Melanie had purchased a .38 caliber handgun just 2 days before her husband disappeared. Surveillance footage and toll records tied her movements to the areas where the suitcases were later found. The prosecution argued that Melanie drugged, shot, and dismembered William inside their Woodbridge apartment before transporting his remains across state lines and discarding them in weighted luggage. Melanie was arrested on June 2, 2005 and charged with first-degree murder, desecration of human remains, unlawful possession of a firearm, and perjury. Her trial began in March 2007 at the Middlesex County Courthouse, and after 7 weeks of testimony and 2 weeks of jury deliberations, she was found guilty on all major counts, including the murder of her husband. On July 19, 2007, Melanie McGuire was sentenced to life in prison with an additional consecutive 5-year term. Under the terms of her sentence, she will not be eligible for parole until she has served more than 6 decades behind bars. Virginia Vertetis. On March 3, 2014, police were called to the Flanders section of Mount Olive Township, New Jersey, where they discovered retired New York City police officer Patrick Gilhooly dead inside the home of his former girlfriend, Virginia Vertetis. Prosecutors later said that Vertetis had fatally shot Gilhooly during a confrontation inside her residence. In 2017, after a full jury trial in Morris County, Vertetis was convicted of first-degree murder and second-degree unlawful possession of a weapon. Judge Stephen J. Taylor sentenced her to 30 years in New Jersey State Prison without the possibility of parole. That conviction, however, did not stand after an appellate court overturned the murder verdict in March 2020, ruling that the jury had been improperly instructed about self-defense law during the trial. Following the reversal, Vertetis accepted a plea agreement. On September 20, 2021, she pleaded guilty to first-degree aggravated manslaughter in the death of Patrick Gilhooly. And 2 months later, on November 18, 2021, Judge Taylor sentenced her to 20 years in New Jersey State Prison under the No Early Release Act, which required her to serve at least 85% of the term. The court also granted her more than 7 years of credit for time already served in custody. Again, in July 2023, the New Jersey Appellate Division vacated that 20-year sentence, finding that the sentencing court had improperly relied on aggravating factors not supported by credible evidence. The case was remanded for a new sentencing hearing. In this resentencing that took place in June 2024, the judge imposed an 18-year prison term. Under state law, Vertetis will be required to serve roughly 15 years and 3 months before becoming eligible for parole. That sentence closed a decade-long legal saga that began with the fatal shooting of Patrick Gilhooly in 2014. Heather Barbera. In July 2018, Ventnor City, New Jersey was stunned when 2 women, 87-year-old Elaine Rosen and her daughter, 67-year-old Michelle Gordon, were found bludgeoned to death inside their condominium at 4800 Boardwalk. Investigators soon determined that the killer was Rosen's own granddaughter and Gordon's daughter, 41-year-old Heather Barbera. Using a nightstick that belonged to her late father, she struck both women multiple times before stealing their jewelry, cash, and credit cards, then leaving the building. Surveillance cameras later captured her carrying bags out of the high-rise. Barbara fled across state lines and used her mother's credit cards in New York City. Days later, authorities tracked her to the Port Authority bus terminal in Midtown Manhattan, where she was found and arrested. Prosecutors charged her with murder, robbery, and unlawful possession of a weapon. In October 2019, she admitted guilt, pleading to first-degree aggravated manslaughter in her mother's death and first-degree murder in her grandmother's killing. In January 2020, at Atlantic County Superior Court in Mays Landing, Judge Bernard DeLury imposed a combined 42-year prison term. The sentence required her to serve 30 years for the murder charge and another 12 years for the manslaughter charge consecutively, leaving her parole eligibility only after 40 years behind bars. In court, Barbera expressed regret, telling the judge she never wanted the killings to happen. Prosecutors, however, emphasized the cold nature of the crime, saying she attacked her mother and grandmother, stole from them, and simply walked away. Leslie Ann Nelson. On the evening of April 20, 1995, in Haddon Heights, New Jersey, officers arrived at the home of Leslie Ann Nelson, formerly known as Glenn Nelson, with a search warrant. From an upstairs window, Nelson opened fire with an assault rifle, and investigator John McLaughlin of the Camden County Prosecutor's Office and Officer John Norcross of the Haddon Heights Police Department were fatally shot. Detective Richard Norcross, John's brother, was also struck but survived his injuries. Nelson, who had undergone sex reassignment surgery in 1992, was diagnosed with depression and antisocial tendencies. Following the shootings, she was arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of aggravated assault. In court, Nelson pleaded guilty, and on February 12, 1997, she was sentenced to death for the murder of Officer John Norcross, to life imprisonment with 30 years without parole for the murder of investigator McLaughlin, and an additional 10 years with 5 years of parole ineligibility for the assault on Detective Richard Norcross. In March 2001, Nelson was resentenced and the death penalty was reinstated for the killing of Officer John Norcross. She remains incarcerated at the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women, where her status has been a subject of public and law enforcement scrutiny. Nakira Greiner. In February 2019, Nakira Greiner called police in Bridgeton, New Jersey, claiming her 23-month-old son, Daniel Greiner Jr., had been abducted after she was attacked while pushing him in a stroller. A search began, but investigators quickly grew suspicious as her statements shifted, and by the next day the search for a missing child turned into the discovery of a crime scene. Police found Daniel's burned and dismembered remains buried in his own backyard, inside trash bags and a shed. The autopsy revealed the boy had been brutally beaten, his skull fractured into dozens of pieces and several ribs broken. Forensic evidence showed that after his death, his body had been placed in an oven and incinerated. In recorded jail calls, Greiner admitted she harmed her son to cover up his bruises. In January 2023, a Cumberland County jury convicted Greiner of first-degree murder, desecration of human remains, child endangerment, evidence tampering, and filing a false public alarm. In the following month, Superior Court Judge George Gangloff Jr. sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Latonia Bellamy. On the night of April 4, 2010, 25-year-old Nia Hawk and her fiancé, 27-year-old Michael Mucciocchi, returned to their Randolph Avenue home in Jersey City after celebrating their engagement. As they parked their car outside, they were confronted by 3 armed individuals. Among them was 19-year-old Latonia Bellamy, a Seton Hall University student, along with her cousin Shaquan Bellamy and an accomplice, Darmelia Lawrence. What began as a carjacking quickly escalated into a brutal double homicide. According to trial testimony and appellate records, Latonia Bellamy expressed interest in firing a weapon during the robbery. During the confrontation, she discharged a handgun in Hawk's direction, while her cousin used a shotgun to execute Mucciocchi. The young couple was robbed and shot on the sidewalk, just steps from their front door, ending their lives on the night they had celebrated a future together. Police investigations tied the suspects to the crime through stolen property and phone records, leading to their arrests within days. In 2013, Latonia Bellamy was convicted on multiple counts, including felony murder, carjacking, armed robbery, conspiracy, and weapons possession. She was sentenced to life in prison and transferred to the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women, where she has been held since February 8, 2013. Her legal case continued for more than a decade, following an appellate remand. On September 18, 2024, she was resentenced to 70 years in prison, 30 years for the felony murder of Michael Mucciocchi, 40 years for the felony murder of Nia Hawk, and additional concurrent terms for carjacking, robbery, and weapons offenses. Under New Jersey's parole restrictions, Bellamy must serve 64 years before she can be considered for release. Darmelia Lawrence. In the same case involving the couple who just got engaged, one of the culprits was Darmelia Lawrence, who was 19 years old at the time, and although she did not fire the shots, she was present during the crime and admitted her involvement in the events that led to the murders. As part of a plea agreement, Darmelia Lawrence testified against the Bellamys. She described how Shaquan and Latonia armed themselves with a sawed-off shotgun and a .32 caliber handgun, put on camouflage clothing, and set out with her to commit the robbery. She recounted seeing the couple forced to the ground, hearing the gunfire that killed them, and later recognizing the shotgun and jacket recovered from a nearby apartment as the same ones used that night. Her fingerprints were also found on the victim's stolen vehicle, linking her directly to the scene. At trial, her testimony became central to the prosecution's case. The physical evidence supported her account. The shotgun matched the fatal blast, the camouflage jacket carried the victim's blood, and the couple's stolen credit cards were discovered near the apartment. Based on this evidence, Shaquan Bellamy was sentenced in 2014 to 2 consecutive life terms, plus additional years for weapons, robbery, and carjacking charges. For her role, Darmelia Lawrence was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Kathleen Dorsett. On August 16, 2010, Stephen Moore, a 42-year-old father from Tinton Falls, New Jersey, disappeared after dropping off his young daughter at the Ocean Township home of his ex-wife's parents. His former wife, Kathleen Dorsett, a 36-year-old former elementary school teacher, had been locked in a bitter custody dispute with him since their divorce just 2 months earlier. That morning, Kathleen lured Stephen to the backyard, where her father, Thomas Dorsett, ambushed him. Stephen was beaten and strangled to death, and his body was placed in the trunk of his mother's Nissan Altima. 2 days later, police discovered the car engulfed in flames in Long Branch, with Stephen's burned remains inside. Investigators quickly unraveled the plot, and Kathleen was arrested on August 23, 2010, and charged with murder and evidence tampering. Her father was arrested shortly after, facing charges of murder and conspiracy. A third man named Anthony Morris was accused of being hired to set fire to the car. While awaiting trial, Kathleen and her mother, Leslie Dorsett, faced additional charges after authorities uncovered a plan to hire a hitman to kill Stephen's mother, Evelyn Moore, who was seeking custody of her granddaughter. The family also faced money laundering charges after investigators found they tried to hide nearly $100,000. In May 2013, Kathleen Dorsett pleaded guilty to murder, conspiracy, and attempted murder. She was sentenced to 58 years in prison, a term that included 30 years for Stephen's murder, 20 years for plotting to kill Evelyn Moore, and 8 years for conspiracy to commit murder, with parole eligibility set for 2057. Her father, Thomas, received a 45-year sentence, and her mother, Leslie, was sentenced to 7 years for conspiracy but was later released on parole. Jennifer Sweeney. In November 2015, Tyrita Julius, a 41-year-old mother from Linden, New Jersey, was shot multiple times while sitting in a car. Miraculously, she survived that attack, but investigators would later prove that the shooting was no random act. It had been orchestrated by her friend and lover, Jennifer Sweeney, with the help of Andre Harris, a man she manipulated into carrying out the attempted murder. By March 2016, the danger escalated when on March 8th, Tyrita spent the day with Sweeney, but she never returned home. Her disappearance was reported the next day, setting off a desperate search. For months, her family held on to hope until the case took a devastating turn. In August 2016, detectives followed a lead to the Long Branch backyard of Andre Harris, and right there they unearthed Tyrita's body, wrapped in garbage bags and buried beneath the soil. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled with an electrical cord. The truth unraveled in the courtroom as prosecutors showed how Jennifer Sweeney, unwilling to let Julius leave their relationship, first ordered the shooting and then carried out the killing herself. In 2019, Harris accepted a plea deal, admitting his role in the earlier shooting and testifying against Sweeney. His cooperation secured him a 16-year sentence. Jennifer Sweeney's trial concluded in September 2021, when a jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, attempted murder, desecration of human remains, weapons offenses, and tampering with evidence. In May 2022, she was sentenced to 95 years in prison, 75 years for murder, and 20 years for attempted murder, to run consecutively. With the New Jersey's No Early Release Act requiring she serve 85% of her term, Sweeney will never live outside prison walls again. Heather Reynolds. On May 10, 2018, police and emergency responders arrived at a home in Sicklerville, Gloucester Township, New Jersey, after receiving a 911 call. They found 17-month-old Axel Reynolds lying unresponsive on the front lawn. At first, the cause of death was unclear, but the medical examiner later determined that Axel had been killed by asphyxia. Investigators also discovered the presence of methamphetamine, raising disturbing questions about how the toddler had been exposed. The investigation quickly turned toward his mother, Heather Reynolds, who was 44 years old at the time. Prosecutors said she viewed her child as an obstacle to an extramarital affair and deliberately killed him. Evidence presented in court included her erratic behavior, phone records, and text messages that prosecutors argued revealed her motive and state of mind. Reynolds was arrested in June 2019, more than a year after her son's death. She was charged with first-degree murder, endangering the welfare of a child, and possession of methamphetamine. Prosecutors also accused her of conspiring with her boyfriend, Jeffrey Callahan, in a separate murder-for-hire plot to kill another man. Although the conspiracy charge was later dismissed, the evidence against her in Axel's death remained strong. In July 2022, Reynolds was found guilty of possession of methamphetamine and endangering the welfare of a child, though she was acquitted on the conspiracy count. On November 15, 2022, Superior Court Judge Gwendolyn Blue sentenced Heather Reynolds to life in prison with no possibility of parole. She also received concurrent sentences of 8 years for child endangerment and 4 years for drug possession. Tina Lune. In July 2009, 81-year-old Marie Zoppi was found dead inside her Fairfield, New Jersey home. At first, the scene looked like a suicide, with a scarf tied around her neck, and the positioning of the body suggested she had taken her own life. But investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies, showing the evidence did not match a suicide. Instead, it pointed to murder. Marie Zoppi's daughter, 46-year-old Tina Looney, had strangled her mother with a necktie after a heated confrontation. Prosecutors later revealed that Looney staged the scene to appear like a suicide and then immediately began using her mother's credit card. She paid utility bills, covered debts, and even funded a vacation to North Carolina's Outer Banks before fleeing to Atlantic City. When she returned home, she admitted what she had done after police found 5 suicide notes in her purse, further evidence of the staging. She was found guilty of murder in May 2013, and on August 13, 2013, Judge Thomas Moore sentenced Looney to 40 years in New Jersey State Prison. Susan Gigliotti. On April 16, 2000, Joseph Gigliotti was murdered in Mays Landing, New Jersey. Investigators later established that his estranged wife, Susan Gigliotti, had conspired with her former boyfriend, Richard DeBow, to carry out the killing. Susan supplied DeBow with a .22 caliber revolver and directed him to commit the murder. DeBow was arrested shortly after, and when confronted with inconsistencies in his account, he admitted that Susan had planned the crime and provided the weapon. Both DeBow and Susan were charged, and at trial, evidence showed that after the murder, Susan confronted DeBow at the prosecutor's office, telling him to keep his mouth shut, while DeBow remarked that they would be going up the river together. The jury found Susan guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, unlawful possession of a weapon, and receiving stolen property. She was sentenced on May 24, 2002, to life imprisonment plus 10 years, with 30 years of parole ineligibility. Susan Gigliotti was committed to the Edna Mahan Correctional Facility for Women, where she participated in the Puppies Behind Bars program, which trains dogs for law enforcement and service work. However, in March 2019, prison officials charged her with animal abuse related to her handling of puppies. Antoinette Stephen. On the night of August 16, 2011, 37-year-old Nazish Noorani was walking in Boonton, New Jersey, with her husband, Kashif Parvez, and their young child after breaking the Ramadan fast. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, but hidden nearby was Antoinette Stephen, a woman from Massachusetts who had been carrying on an affair with Parvez. Acting under his direction, Antoinette stepped from the shadows and opened fire, killing Noorani and wounding Parvez in what was staged to look like a random attack. In the immediate aftermath, Parvez told investigators conflicting stories. At one point he claimed that the shooting was an anti-Muslim hate crime, but police quickly found his account suspicious. Phone records and text messages revealed that Parvez had been plotting Noorani's murder with Antoinette, who admitted that she acted out of devotion to him. Within days of the shooting, both Parvez and Antoinette were arrested. Parvez faced charges of murder, conspiracy, weapons offenses, and child endangerment, while Antoinette was charged with murder, conspiracy, and weapons offenses as the shooter. On May 21, 2015, Kashif Parvez was sentenced to life in prison under New Jersey's No Early Release Act, plus additional consecutive terms that brought his total sentence to 85 years. Antoinette Stephen, who had agreed to testify against Parvez, entered a guilty plea, and on June 5, 2015, she was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole until the term is fully served. Sherry Lee Heffernan. On September 29, 2021, 87-year-old John Enders and his partner, 75-year-old Françoise Pitoy, were brutally murdered inside Enders' Surf City home on Long Beach Island, New Jersey. The couple's bodies were discovered days later on October 3 during a welfare check. Autopsy reports showed Enders had suffered multiple stab wounds, blunt force trauma, and a gunshot wound to the face, while Pitoy had been shot in the face and stabbed repeatedly. Investigators quickly identified Enders' daughter, 55-year-old Sherry Lee Heffernan, as the prime suspect. Prosecutors revealed that Enders had recently excluded her from his will and refused to let her, a realtor, list his multi-million-dollar property for sale. Detectives said surveillance footage captured a recreational vehicle registered to Heffernan near the home. Her cell phone data placed her in the area, and bloody footprints in the house matched her shoes. On October 4, 2021, Heffernan was arrested at her home in Landenberg, Pennsylvania. She was extradited back to New Jersey and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a weapon, and possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose. After a jury trial in March 2024, she was convicted on all counts. The court agreed with prosecutors that the motive was driven by inheritance disputes and her exclusion from control of her father's property. On May 10, 2024, Superior Court Judge Camaria Rahil sentenced Heffernan to 2 consecutive life terms in New Jersey State Prison, requiring her to serve more than 63 years before becoming eligible for parole. Mayra Gavilanes electus. In May 2020, a shocking act of domestic violence in Brick Township, New Jersey, left 32-year-old Rebecca Gavilanes electus dead inside her Creek Road home. Prosecutors revealed that her wife, 49-year-old Mayra Gavilanes electus, struck her repeatedly with a cylindrical container designed for chilling wine. The brutal attack happened sometime between May 16 and May 17, 2020. Police were called to the residence on May 17, and by the following day the Ocean County medical examiner had ruled the death a homicide. As detectives investigated, the evidence quickly pointed back to Mayra, and within days a warrant was issued for her arrest on May 18, 2020. She fled New Jersey, but federal agents tracked her across state lines and located her in Houston, Texas, and on May 21, 2020, she was taken into custody and later extradited back to Ocean County to face charges. Prosecutors charged her with murder, possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, and unlawful possession of a weapon. 2 years later, on January 12, 2023, Mayra Gavilanes electus was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Because the sentence falls under the No Early Release Act, she must serve more than 38 years before she will be eligible for parole. Deborah A. Aquilina. In February of 2003, police in Bergen County responded to the home of Deborah Aquilina and her husband, Ralph Ludwig Jr. Ralph was found dead inside the residence, and at first the death appeared to be a possible overdose, but that story began to unravel as investigators dug deeper. Testimony later revealed that Deborah, along with her son Mark Aquilina and an accomplice named Gerritsen, had been involved in planning Ralph's death. Prosecutors argued that Ralph was deliberately killed with an overdose, a crime carried out to rid the family of him and secure control of the household. On May 1, 2009, after a full trial in Bergen County, a jury convicted Deborah Aquilina of first-degree murder, first-degree conspiracy to commit murder, third-degree possession of cocaine and heroin, and third-degree hindering apprehension. She was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder conviction, with 85% parole ineligibility under the No Early Release Act, along with additional concurrent and consecutive terms for the other charges. If you enjoyed this and want to see more interesting videos, I'm going to be posting every day on this channel. I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe. Thank you very much.